The faith they taught me was a lie, but I did not know this until the warp showed me the truth. I was Father Mordecai Thane, missionary of the Ecclesiarchy, servant of the God Emperor, bearer of his holy light to the darkest corners of the Imperium. I had converted thousands, baptized worlds in his name, stood before xenos, horrors and heretics alike with unwavering certainty in my righteousness. But faith, I have learned, is a fragile thing when confronted with the reality that lurks beyond the veil of our universe. What happens when the servants of the Emperor glimpse the true nature of the warp, and the entities that dwell within it? What becomes of devotion when you hear whispers that claim your God is not what you were told, but something far more terrible, something that feeds on your very worship? The cathedral ships of the Ecclesiarchy move through the void with the grace of prayers made manifest. Spires of gold and marble, stained glass depicting the glory of the Emperor, incense burning eternally in 1,000 chapels. This was my world, my universe contained within walls of blessed adamantium and faith. I never questioned, I never doubted, not until the Geller field failed and the Immaterium came flooding in. I served aboard the missionary vessel Eternal Devotion, a cathedral-class ship dedicated to spreading the Imperial Creed to frontier worlds and reclaimed systems. For 47 standard years, I performed my duties without error or hesitation. I led prayers at dawn, heard confessions at midday, conducted evening mass, and spent my nights in study of the holy texts. 17 worlds had felt the touch of my sermons. 33,000 souls had been brought into the Emperor's light through my ministrations. The Ecclesiarchy had commended me 7 times for zealous service. My quarters were austere, as befitted a servant of the faith. A narrow cot, a lectern for my prayer books, a small shrine to the Emperor with candles that never went out, walls hung with purity seals and prayers written in High Gothic. I owned nothing that was not necessary for worship or survival. This was the way of the devoted, the path I had chosen as a young man when the Schola Progenium identified my aptitude for theological instruction. The Eternal Devotion carried a complement of 300 clergy, from lowly acolytes to Cardinal Hester himself, who commanded our mission with an iron will wrapped in velvet benedictions. 5,000 pilgrims traveled with us, seeking to settle the newly reclaimed world of Sanctus Reach, a planet cleansed of orc infestation 3 years prior and now ready for imperial colonization. We entered the warp on schedule, the navigators having plotted a course that would take us through relatively calm currents of the Immaterium. Standard transit time 40 days. The Geller field generators hummed their protective hymn, keeping the madness of the warp at bay. The ship's machine spirits were appeased through proper ritual. All was as it should be. I remember standing in the chapel of eternal vigilance on the 3rd day of our journey, leading a congregation of 200 pilgrims in evening prayers. The stained glass above the altar depicted the Emperor's ascension to the golden throne, light filtering through it in colors that seemed to pulse with holy radiance. My voice echoed through the vaulted chamber as I recited the litany of faith. In the darkness of the void, his light guides us. In the terror of the warp, his protection shelters us. In the face of heresy, his word strengthens us. The congregation responded in unison, their voices creating a chorus that should have pleased the Emperor himself. I felt no premonition then, no warning of what was to come. Faith was absolute, certainty complete. After the service, I retired to my quarters for my nightly meditation. The ship's chronometer read 22:47 ship time. I knelt before my shrine, lit fresh candles, and began my prayers. The words came easily, worn smooth by decades of repetition. I barely noticed the moment when the temperature in my chamber dropped, when frost began to form on the metal walls, when my breath became visible in the suddenly frigid air. The candles flickered, then went out, all of them simultaneously. In 47 years of service, I had never seen my shrine candles extinguish themselves. They were blessed, consecrated, protected by the Emperor's grace. It should have been impossible. I stood, reaching for the lumen switch beside my door. The lights did not respond. Emergency lighting should have activated automatically, bathing the corridor beyond in red illumination. Nothing. The darkness was absolute, deeper than any shadow I had experienced before. Then I heard it. A whisper, barely audible, coming from everywhere and nowhere. It spoke in a language I should not have understood, words that predated humanity's emergence from old Earth, syllables that twisted reality simply by being spoken. Yet somehow, impossibly, I comprehended their meaning. Faithful servant of a corpse god, do you truly know what you worship? I fell back, my hands instinctively reaching for the Aquila pendant around my neck. The blessed symbol felt cold against my palm, colder than the metal should have been even in the frigid air. Emperor, protect me, I whispered, my voice shaking despite my decades of training. I reject the lies of chaos. I stand in the light of his grace. Laughter echoed through my chamber, the sound of it sending ice through my veins. Not cruel laughter, but something worse. Pity. The entity, whatever it was, pitied me. Protection from what, little priest? From truth? From understanding? Your emperor sits rotting on his throne, a corpse sustained by the daily sacrifice of 1,000 souls. You call this divinity? Heresy, I hissed, gripping my Aquila tighter. The emperor is immortal, eternal, the master of mankind. Then why does he require the life force of others to maintain his existence? What god needs to feed? The question struck me like a physical blow. In all my years of theological study, this particular aspect of the emperor's maintenance had been presented as necessary sacrifice, as willing martyrdom by psychers whose gifts would otherwise doom them to possession by warp entities. It was framed as mercy, as purpose given to those who would otherwise be destroyed or corrupted. I had never questioned the underlying logic. The psychers are blessed to serve him in this way, I said, repeating the catechism I had been taught. Their sacrifice sustains the Astronomicon, guides humanity through the warp, protects trillions. Sustains a corpse, the voice corrected. Feeds the slowly dying remnant of a being who was powerful once, but is now merely persistent. You worship carrion, priest. Noble carrion perhaps, but dead flesh nonetheless. Light suddenly blazed in my chamber, but not from any source I recognized. A sickly green luminescence seeped from the walls themselves, revealing details I had not noticed before in the darkness. The frost on the metal had formed patterns. Not random crystals, but writing. Symbols that hurt to look at directly, that seemed to crawl across the surfaces even as I watched. I looked away, forcing my eyes to focus on my shrine. The Emperor's icon still stood there, illuminated by the unnatural light. For the first time in my life, I found myself studying it not with devotion but with critical observation. The golden throne beneath him. The tubes and wires connecting to his desiccated form. The skull-like appearance of his face, skin stretched tight over bone. The artistic rendition I had prayed before for decades suddenly seemed less like a depiction of divine glory and more like an illustration of prolonged decay. "Stop," I commanded, shaking my head violently. "These are lies. Corruption. I will not listen." "You already have," the voice replied, now seeming to come from within my own thoughts. "And you cannot unhear truth once it has entered your mind. Tell me, priest, in all your years of service, all your study of doctrine and theology, did you never wonder why your God requires worship?" "All gods require worship," I said automatically. "It is the natural relationship between divine and mortal." "Is it? Or is it something else? What if your worship does not honor him but sustains him? What if every prayer, every act of devotion, every soul that cries out in his name feeds the slowly fading embers of his existence?" I opened my mouth to refute this, to cite scripture and doctrine, but the words would not come. Because somewhere, in a part of my mind that I had been trained to ignore, a seed of doubt had taken root. The question was logical. Disturbing but logical. "You serve aboard this vessel to spread his worship," the voice continued, growing stronger, more present. "But have you ever asked why the ecclesiarchy is so obsessed with conversion? with bringing every human soul under the Imperial Creed? Is it truly for the salvation of their immortal souls, or is it to provide more sustenance for the dying god you call Emperor? The Emperor protects, I said, falling back on the most fundamental prayer of the Imperial faith. In life, war. In death, peace. In life, shame. In death, atonement. Pretty words. Empty words. The Emperor protects nothing. He cannot even protect himself. Your Imperium crumbles at its edges, beset by enemies on all sides, held together by fear and ignorance and the brutal suppression of truth. Is this the work of a god? Or of a corpse whose followers mistake decay for divinity? The temperature dropped further. My breath came in ragged clouds. The green light intensified, and I became aware of other presences in my chamber. Shapes at the edge of perception, things that existed in dimensions my eyes were not meant to perceive. They moved through my quarters, examining my possessions, my prayer books, my purity seals, with what seemed like curious amusement. I should have fled. I should have called for help, alerted the ship's chaplains, sought sanctuary in the cathedral proper where the combined faith of the clergy might drive away this intrusion. Instead, I remained frozen, my mind wrestling with questions I had never been permitted to ask. What are you? I finally managed to whisper. Names are complicated in the warp, the voice replied. What I am depends on who perceives me. To some, I am a demon of Tsench, weaver of change, manipulator of fate. To others, I am simply a current in the sea of souls, carrying truths that your species has tried desperately to forget. What matters is not what I am, but what I can show you. I want nothing from creatures of the warp. Liar. You want understanding. You have always wanted understanding. Your faith was strong because you sought to comprehend the divine, to grasp the nature of the Emperor's grace through study and contemplation. This made you valuable to the ecclesiarchy but also dangerous, because true understanding cannot coexist with blind faith. The entity was right and I hated that it was right. Throughout my service, I had been the one who asked questions others deemed inappropriate. Why did the Emperor remain silent if he still lived? How could he protect humanity while confined to the Golden Throne? If he was divine, why permit the Imperium to suffer such constant warfare and devastation? Each time, I had been given answers that satisfied the doctrine but never fully addressed the underlying logic. Each time, I had accepted those answers and suppressed my doubts. Until now. The Geller field, I said suddenly. It has failed. That is why you can manifest here, speak to me. The ship is in danger. The Geller field has not failed, the entity corrected. It has been adjusted, thinned at specific points to allow communication without permitting the full horror of the warp to flood in. Your vessel remains protected, your fellow passengers safe in their ignorance. Only you, Father Thane, are afforded this moment of enlightenment. Why me? Because you are ready. Because your faith, while strong, has always contained the seeds of doubt. Because the warp has been watching you for years, waiting for the right moment to show you what lies beneath the lies you have been taught. A new sound reached my ears. Alarms, distant but growing closer. Emergency klaxons blaring throughout the ship. Then voices shouting, screaming. The unmistakable thunder of bolter fire. Something was happening beyond my chamber, something terrible. What have you done? I demanded, lurching toward my door. I have done nothing, the entity said. But the thinning of the Geller field has allowed others through less subtle entities than myself. They feed on faith as I feed on doubt, but their methods are more direct. Your fellow clergy fight them now, calling upon the Emperor's protection, wielding faith as a weapon. Watch how effective their prayers prove against the true powers of the warp. My door had been locked, but now it swung open at my touch, revealing the corridor beyond. What I saw there would haunt me for the remainder of my days. The passageway was awash in blood. Bodies lay strewn across the deck, pilgrims and crew members torn apart by something with claws like adamantium and strength beyond human capability. But the thing that had killed them was nowhere to be seen. Instead, I saw my fellow clergy, 3 priests I had served alongside for years, standing in a defensive formation around a group of survivors. They chanted prayers, held up aquilas and holy texts, called upon the Emperor to smite the demons that assailed them. And for a moment it seemed to work. Golden light surrounded the priests, emanating from their holy symbols. I felt hope surge in my chest. The Emperor did protect. Faith was a weapon against the darkness. Then I looked closer and saw the truth. The light came not from the aquilas themselves but from the priests. From their souls, their life force, burning like candles to create a momentary barrier against the warp entities. Even as I watched, one of the priests collapsed, his body withering as if aged 100 years in seconds. The light flickered and died. The demons, now visible as things of tooth and claw and impossible geometry, fell upon the survivors. You see, the voice whispered in my mind, faith has power in the warp, this is true. But that power comes from the souls of the faithful themselves, not from any god. When your priests call upon the Emperor, they burn their own essence to create momentary shields. It is effective briefly, but ultimately they are sacrificing themselves. Just as the psychers on the Golden Throne sacrifice themselves daily. Your entire religion is built on the consumption of human souls to sustain the illusion of divine protection. I fell to my knees, unable to process what I was witnessing. Another priest collapsed, then the third. The survivors they had been protecting were slaughtered in seconds. The corridor fell silent except for the dripping of blood and the soft, satisfied sounds of feeding demons. This cannot be, I whispered. The Emperor is divine. His protection is real. Millions of Imperial servants have witnessed his miracles, felt his presence, been saved by his grace. And every one of those miracles cost someone their soul, the entity replied. Every act of divine intervention was paid for by human sacrifice. Your Emperor is not a god, Father Thane. He is a machine, a vast psychic mechanism that converts worship and sacrifice into power. A mechanism that has been running for 10,000 years, consuming souls to maintain its operation. You do not pray to divinity. You feed an engine of spiritual cannibalism. The words struck me with the force of revelation. Not because I wanted to believe them, but because they explained so much that doctrine had always glossed over. The constant need for faith, for worship, for the suppression of doubt. The ecclesiarchy's obsession with conversion and the punishment of heresy. The daily sacrifice of psychers to maintain the Astronomicon. All of it fit together with horrible clarity when viewed not as divine necessity but as the operation of a vast machine that required fuel to function. No, I said, forcing the word out through clenched teeth. No, I refuse to accept this. The Emperor is the master of mankind. He protects us from the horrors of the galaxy. Without him, humanity would fall to chaos. Would it? Or has his existence merely made humanity a target? The warp was not always as turbulent as it is now. The entities that dwell here were not always so hostile to your kind. But the birth of your Emperor, the creation of such a powerful psychic presence, drew attention from things that had previously ignored humanity. And his current state, a perpetually dying god machine, creates a beacon in the warp that attracts every predator and parasite in the Immaterium. You say he protects humanity. I say his existence endangers it. I wanted to argue, to refute this with scripture and doctrine, but I could not. The logic was too compelling, the evidence too clear. I had seen my fellow priests burn their souls to create momentary protection. I had studied the history of the Imperium, seen how it had slowly crumbled over 10 millennia despite the Emperor's supposed oversight. I had read accounts of his great works during the Crusade era and noticed how they had all been accomplished before his interment on the Golden Throne, before he became the withered corpse that now required constant sacrifice to maintain. What am I supposed to do with this knowledge? I asked, my voice hollow. That is your choice, the entity replied. You can reject it, cling to your faith, and die believing the lies you have been taught. Many do. It is easier than accepting uncomfortable truth. Or you can embrace understanding, see the Imperium and the Emperor for what they truly are, and make decisions based on reality rather than doctrine. And become a heretic, a traitor to everything I have devoted my life to. Or become something else, something new. The warp is not inherently evil, Father Thane. It is a reflection of consciousness, of emotion, of thought given form. What humans call demons are simply beings native to this realm, no more inherently evil than humans are. They become hostile because they are treated as enemies, fought against, demonized. But there are other paths, other ways of understanding and interacting with the Immaterium. The green light began to fade. The temperature slowly rose. The presences I had sensed withdrawing, leaving me alone in my blood-splattered corridor surrounded by the corpses of my fellow clergy and the pilgrims they had died trying to protect. "I will give you time to contemplate what you have learned," the voice said, growing distant. "The Geller field will strengthen again soon. Your vessel will be secure. But you, Father Thane, will never be secure again. The questions have been planted in your mind. They will grow, fed by every prayer you recite, every doctrine you preach, every time you witness the machinery of the Imperium consuming souls in the name of a dead god." "Wait," I called out. "If what you say is true, if the Emperor is merely a machine, then what should we worship? What is the truth of existence?" Laughter echoed one final time, fading into silence. "That, little priest, is the question you must answer for yourself. Truth is not given. It is discovered, often at terrible cost. Good luck with your search." Then it was gone. The corridor lights flickered back to life, bathing the scene of carnage in harsh white illumination. I stood there, still on my knees, surrounded by the dead, my entire worldview cracking like shattered glass. Cardinal Hester found me there an hour later, when the ship's security teams finally swept through the affected sections. He took one look at me, at the bodies, at my expression, and his face hardened. "Father Thane," he said, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "What happened here?" I opened my mouth to explain, to tell him about the entity, the questions, the horrible revelations. But something stopped me. Perhaps survival instinct. Perhaps the last remnant of my faith warning me that speaking such truths aloud would mark me as corrupted, as heretical, as worthy only of immediate execution. "The Geller field failed briefly," I said instead, surprised at how steady my voice sounded. "Demons manifested. The priests attempted to defend the pilgrims but were overwhelmed. I arrived too late to help." Hester studied me with eyes that had seen 1,000 souls laid bare in confession. "And you were unharmed? Untouched by the demonic presence?" "The Emperor protected me," I lied, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. He nodded slowly, though doubt lingered in his expression. "You will submit to examination by the ship's inquisitorial observer. Standard procedure after warp exposure. Comply fully and truthfully. Is this understood?" "Yes, Your Eminence." "Then go clean yourself, Father Thane. And pray. Pray that your soul remains pure despite what you have witnessed." I walked back to my quarters on unsteady legs, leaving the Cardinal to oversee the removal of the bodies. My chamber was exactly as I had left it. The frost melted, the green light gone, no trace remaining of the entity's presence. Only my shrine stood as evidence, and as I looked at it now, I could not bring myself to kneel before it. The examination by Inquisitor Vex was thorough and brutal. She was a stern woman in her 60s, her face scarred by a lifetime of hunting heresy, her eyes augmented with expensive bionics that could reportedly detect lies and spiritual corruption. For 3 hours, she questioned me about every detail of the incident. What had I seen? What had I heard? Had any entity spoken to me directly? Had I been offered gifts, promises, temptations? I lied with every answer. The skills I had developed over decades of hearing confessions served me well in reverse, allowing me to present a facade of traumatized faith while hiding the doubt that now consumed my thoughts. I spoke of prayer and devotion, of witnessing my fellow clergy's noble sacrifice, of my own unworthiness to have survived when holier men had fallen. She did not believe me, I could see that in her augmented eyes. But she could not prove corruption, could not identify any specific falsehood in my testimony. Finally, after the 3rd hour, she dismissed me with a warning. "Your soul walks a razor's edge, Father Thane." I sense doubt in you, questions that should not be asked. Remember that the Emperor protects those who serve with absolute faith. Waver and you invite corruption. Do you understand? I understand, Inquisitor. Then go. Resume your duties. But know that I will be watching you closely for the remainder of this voyage. One sign of taint, one hint of heresy, and I will not hesitate to exercise the Emperor's justice. I returned to my duties, but I was changed. Every prayer I led felt hollow. Every sermon I preached sounded like lies. Every time a pilgrim came to me seeking spiritual guidance, I found myself wondering if I was simply feeding them falsehoods, binding them more tightly to a system that would ultimately consume their souls. The eternal devotion continued its journey through the warp, and the days passed in a haze of forced normalcy. I performed my functions, attended masses, conducted confessions, but my mind was elsewhere. The entity's questions had taken root, and I could not stop myself from examining everything through this new lens of doubt. I began to study the ship's archives in my spare time, searching for information that might either confirm or deny what I had been told. The texts available to a missionary were limited, carefully curated by the ecclesiarchy to present only approved interpretations of imperial history and theology. But even within these sanitized accounts, I found troubling details. The Emperor's state after the heresy, described as entombed upon the golden throne to eternally watch over humanity, never explicitly stated as dead, but never confirmed as truly alive either. The constant consumption of psyker souls to maintain the Astronomicon, presented as necessary sacrifice, but the scale was staggering. 1,000 psykers daily for 10,000 years. Millions of souls consumed to keep the Emperor's machine functioning. And the Astronomicon itself, the great lighthouse that guided humanity through the warp. Without it, travel would be nearly impossible, the Imperium would fragment, humanity would be isolated on individual worlds. A necessity without question. But also a massive expenditure of psychic power, all channeled through the Emperor on his throne. Was he truly conscious, actively guiding the beacon? Or was he simply the conduit, the mechanism through which psyker souls were converted into navigational light? I found no clear answers, only more questions. Questions that doctrine forbade, that faith demanded I ignore, but that I could no longer suppress. On the 27th day of our voyage, another incident occurred. This time, I was in the cathedral proper, leading evening prayers for a congregation of 500 pilgrims. The service had just reached the hymn of divine protection when I felt it, a subtle shift in the ambient psychic pressure, a thinning of the boundary between real space and the warp. The entity had returned. Still faithful, little priest? Its voice whispered in my mind, inaudible to the congregation around me but crystal clear in my thoughts. Or have the questions begun to bear fruit? I continued reciting the hymn without pause, giving no outward sign of the intrusion. But inwardly I responded, "What do you want? Why do you torment me?" Torment? I offer enlightenment. It is your choice whether to embrace it or cling to comfortable lies. Tell me, have you discovered anything in your research that contradicts what I told you? I had not. Every piece of information I had found, every historical account, every theological text, had either confirmed the entity's claims or at least failed to disprove them. The Emperor's current state was never clearly described. His consciousness was asserted but never evidenced. His divinity was proclaimed but never explained. What do you gain from my doubt? I asked silently. If you are a demon of Tsench, surely you simply seek to corrupt me, to turn me from the Emperor's light. Perhaps. Or perhaps I seek something more interesting. Your species has such potential, Father Thane. But you are crippled by faith in a dead god, by devotion to a corpse. Imagine what humanity could become if freed from these chains. Imagine the innovations, the progress, the evolution that might occur if your kind stopped feeding souls to a machine and instead used that psychic potential for genuine advancement. And in the process become slaves to the chaos gods. Trade one master for four. How is that freedom? Who speaks of slavery? The entities of the warp are not gods either, despite what your Imperium claims. They are concentrations of emotion, of thought, of universal consciousness. They can be bargained with, understood, even shaped by sufficiently powerful will. But only if one first acknowledges their existence and nature honestly, without the filter of imperial propaganda. The congregation reached the final verse of the hymn. I raised my hands in benediction, blessing them in the Emperor's name while my mind churned with forbidden thoughts. I will not become a heretic, I said firmly, though whether I was trying to convince the entity or myself I could not say. I will not betray everything I have devoted my life to. Have you considered that your life's devotion might itself be the betrayal? That by serving the ecclesiarchy, by spreading the imperial creed, you have been complicit in the enslavement of billions of souls to a dying god machine? Your hands are not clean, little priest. They are stained with the spiritual blood of every soul you have converted. The words hit me like a thunderbolt. I had converted thousands, brought them into the faith, taught them to worship the Emperor, bound them to a system that would ultimately consume their psychic essence. If the entity spoke truth, then I was not a servant of divinity. I was a recruiter for a vast spiritual abattoir. My legs went weak. I stumbled at the altar, caught myself on the edge of the pulpit. The congregation gasped, concern rippling through their ranks. Cardinal Hester, observing from the wings, stepped forward with a look of alarm. Father Thane? Are you unwell? I straightened, forcing composure. A momentary weakness, Your Eminence. The warp exposure from the previous incident perhaps affecting me still. You should submit to further examination by Inquisitor Vex. That will not be necessary. I simply require rest. Hester did not look convinced, but he nodded. Very well. Father Kale will conclude the service. Go rest, and may the Emperor watch over you. I left the cathedral, feeling the weight of 1,000 eyes upon my back. In the corridor outside, away from the congregation, I allowed myself to lean against the wall, breathing heavily. You begin to see, the entity whispered, its satisfaction evident. You begin to understand the true horror of what you have done in the Emperor's name. Leave me, I hissed aloud, not caring if anyone heard. I want nothing more from you. You want everything from me. You want answers, truth, understanding. And I will provide them whether you wish it or not. Because the questions have been planted, Father Thane. They will grow. And eventually they will consume your faith entirely. The presence faded, leaving me alone in the corridor, my mind a whirlwind of doubt and horror. I made my way back to my quarters, sealed the door, and collapsed onto my cot. For the first time in 47 years of service, I did not pray before sleeping. Instead, I wept. For my faith, dying in the face of terrible logic. For the souls I had condemned through my conversions. For the lies I had believed and spread. For the comfortable certainty I had lost and could never reclaim. The eternal devotion sailed on through the warp, carrying its cargo of faithful pilgrims toward Sanctus Reach. But I was no longer one of them. The missionary who had boarded this vessel 5 weeks ago was gone, replaced by something else. Something broken, doubting, questioning. Something that could no longer unsee the truth that had been revealed. The days that followed were a descent into personal hell more terrible than anything the warp had shown me. I continued my duties because I did not know what else to do, because abandoning them would mark me as corrupted and invite immediate execution. But every prayer felt like blasphemy now, every sermon like poison on my tongue. The pilgrims came to me with their fears, their doubts, their need for spiritual comfort. And I comforted them with lies, bound them more tightly to their chains, fed them to the machine that I now believe the Emperor to be. Each time I hated myself a little more. Inquisitor Vex watched me constantly, her augmented eyes tracking my movements, analyzing my words and behaviors for signs of taint. Several times she pulled me aside for questioning, probing for weakness, for the corruption she was certain I carried. But I had become skilled at deception, at hiding my true thoughts behind a mask of traumatized faith. You are broken, Father Thane, she said during one such interrogation. The warp has touched you, left its mark. I cannot prove it yet, but I know. And when I find evidence of your corruption, I will personally perform the rites of execution. I welcome your vigilance, Inquisitor, I replied, the lie coming easily now. If I have been tainted, better that it be discovered and purged than allowed to spread. She studied me with those inhuman eyes, searching for the crack in my facade. You speak correctly, but I sense insincerity. Mark my words, priest. I will uncover your heresy. On the 35th day of our voyage, the entity returned for the third time. I was alone in my quarters, pretending to study scripture while actually staring blankly at pages I could no longer bring myself to read with belief. The temperature dropped, and I knew before it spoke that it had come again. Hello again, Father Thane. How goes your crisis of faith? Why do you keep returning? I asked wearily. What do you want from me? I want you to make a choice, it replied. To either fully embrace the truth I have shown you or reject it and return to your comfortable ignorance. But choose. This liminal state you currently occupy, neither faithful nor heretical, serves no one. There is no choice to make. If I reject the Emperor, I am a heretic. The Inquisitor will execute me. If I embrace your truth, I am corrupted by chaos. The result is the same. Is it? You assume there are only two paths, service to the corpse god or damnation by chaos. But reality is more complex than your binary imperial thinking allows. There are other gods, other powers, other ways of understanding the universe. You speak of the xenos gods, the Eldar pantheon, the Ork nonsense, the Tau's greater good. None of these are relevant to humanity. I speak of older powers than any of these. Forces that existed before your emperor was born, that will endure long after he finally dies completely. The fundamental truths of existence that your Imperium has spent 10,000 years trying to suppress and deny. Despite myself, I was intrigued. What truths? That consciousness shapes reality. That belief has power. That the warp is not a separate dimension to be feared and rejected, but a natural extension of the material universe, the realm where thought becomes form. Your emperor understood this once, before his ambitions destroyed him. He sought to harness the warp's power while denying its nature. This contradiction doomed him and eventually will doom your entire species. Then what would you have me do? Worship chaos? Embrace damnation? I would have you understand that chaos is not inherently evil, merely inimical to order. Your Imperium's rigid structure, its enforced uniformity, its suppression of innovation and change, these things naturally create opposition in the warp. What you call chaos gods are simply the accumulated emotional and psychic response to 10,000 years of imperial tyranny. The logic was seductive, dangerously so. I could feel it worming into my thoughts, reshaping my understanding of everything I had been taught. I tried to resist, to hold fast to doctrine, but the foundation of my faith had already been shattered. Even if what you say is true, I said slowly, what difference does it make? I am one missionary on one vessel. My understanding or lack thereof changes nothing. On the contrary, you underestimate your potential influence. You have the ear of pilgrims, of fellow clergy, of those who seek spiritual guidance. The truths I have shown you could spread through your words, your actions, your presence. Seeds of doubt planted in fertile minds, growing into. But worse than his appearance was what I felt emanating from him. Not divinity. Not grace or protection or holy power. Just hunger. An endless, aching need that consumed everything fed to it and demanded more. The daily sacrifice of 1,000 psychers was not enough. It would never be enough. The machine required more, always more, an endless supply of souls to burn in its furnace. And around him I saw them. The souls of the faithful, drawn to this place by their worship, their prayers, their devotion. Billions of threads of psychic energy flowing from across the galaxy, feeding the slowly dying God machine. Every prayer I had ever recited, every soul I had converted, every act of faith I had witnessed, all of it channeled here, consumed here, burned away to by another moment of the Emperor's persistence. "Do you understand now?" the entity asked, its voice gentle, almost pitying. "This is what you serve. Not a god. Not even a man anymore. A mechanism, Father Thane. A vast psychic engine that converts worship into power, faith into fuel. And you have been its recruiter, its gatherer of combustible souls." I tried to look away but could not. The vision held me transfixed, forcing me to witness the machinery of my own damnation. I saw souls burning in the Emperor's aura, their essence stripped away layer by layer until nothing remained. I saw the Astronomicon, that great lighthouse, and understood it for what it truly was. A beacon, yes, but one fueled by an endless holocaust of psychic immolation. "The Emperor may have been a man once," the entity continued. "Perhaps even a great man. But 10,000 years of this has made him into something else. Something that cannot let go, cannot die, cannot cease its endless consumption. He is trapped as surely as the psychers he devours. And the Imperium, in its desperation to maintain him, has become the largest soul-harvesting operation in galactic history." "Then what?" I screamed, my voice echoing through the warp space. "What would you have me do? Let him die? Let the Astronomicon fail? Watch the Imperium fragment and fall to xenos and chaos alike?" "Perhaps that is what should happen," the entity replied calmly. "Perhaps humanity's survival as a species is less important than humanity's freedom as individuals. Perhaps it would be better to die free than live as cattle bred for slaughter." "That's insane. You're asking me to embrace the extinction of my entire species. I'm asking you to recognize reality. What happens next is your choice. But you can no longer claim ignorance, Father Thane. You have seen the truth. You know what the Emperor is, what the Imperium does, what your own service has accomplished. Now you must decide who you wish to be." The vision released me. I found myself back in my chamber, gasping on my knees before my shrine. The Emperor's icon stared down at me with dead metal eyes, and I could no longer see holiness in it. Only machinery. Only hunger. I do not know how long I remained there. Hours perhaps. When I finally rose, my decision was made. I could not continue as I had been. Could not stand at the pulpit and preach lies, could not guide souls into the furnace, could not serve a machine that wore divinity like a mask. But neither could I embrace chaos, could not become the thing the Imperium rightly feared. There was only one path left to me. I spent the remaining days of our voyage preparing. I recorded everything, every encounter with the entity, every revelation, every doubt and question that had consumed my faith. I wrote it in the margins of prayer books, on scraps of parchment hidden in my quarters, encoded in seemingly innocent theological observations. If I was to die, and I knew that I would, then at least the truth would survive me. Perhaps someone would find these words someday. Perhaps they would understand. On the 40th day we emerged from the warp above Sanctus Reach. The eternal devotion had survived its journey, though 47 souls had been lost to the demonic incursion. The pilgrims prepared to disembark, to begin their new lives on this reclaimed world. Cardinal Hester led prayers of thanksgiving for our safe arrival. I did not attend. Instead, I went to Inquisitor Vex. "You were right," I told her, standing in the doorway of her chamber. "I am corrupted. The warp showed me truths I cannot unlearn, planted doubts I cannot suppress. I have tried to resist, but I am compromised beyond redemption." She stood slowly, her augmented eyes whirring as they focused on me with terrible intensity. "You confess to heresy?" "I confess to doubt, to questioning, to seeing things that cannot be unseen. Whether that constitutes heresy, I leave to your judgment." For a long moment, she studied me in silence. Then she drew her bolt pistol with practiced efficiency. "Your honesty is unexpected, Father Thane. Most corrupted souls cling to their deceptions until the very end. This speaks well of whatever remains of your spirit." "I have no wish to spread my corruption," I said and meant it. "I have no desire to serve the ruinous powers. But I can no longer serve the Emperor either, not as I understand him now. So I come to you freely to accept the Emperor's justice. And the entity that corrupted you? Does it speak to you still? No. Its work is done. I am broken beyond repair. She nodded slowly. Then I will grant you a mercy. You may write a final prayer, a last testament of faith if any remains in you. Then I will personally administer the Emperor's judgment. You will die shriven and at peace, rather than screaming under interrogation. This is more than most heretics receive. Thank you, Inquisitor. She escorted me to the Chapel of Penitence, a small chamber reserved for those who had sinned but sought redemption. A writing desk stood before a simple altar. She provided parchment and quill, then stepped back to the doorway, her weapon never wavering. You have 1 hour. Write what you must. When you are finished, we will proceed with the execution. And so I wrote. Not a prayer, not a testament of faith, but this account. The truth of what I experienced, what I learned, what destroyed my faith. Let others read it and judge for themselves. Let them decide whether the entity spoke truth or lies, whether the Emperor is divine or merely a dying machine sustained by spiritual cannibalism. I write these final words with clarity and calm. I do not know if I was corrupted by chaos or enlightened by uncomfortable truth. Perhaps there is no difference. Perhaps in the grim darkness of the far future, madness and revelation are two names for the same thing. But I know this, I can no longer serve blind faith. I can no longer feed souls to a furnace, divine or otherwise. If this makes me a heretic, then I embrace the title. If this means my death, then I welcome it. The hour draws to a close. I can hear Inquisitor Vex approaching, her footsteps measured and certain. She will read these words after I am gone, will likely burn them as corrupted scripture. But perhaps a page will survive. Perhaps someone will understand what I tried to say. The Emperor's grace was once my shield, my comfort, my certainty. Now I have only questions and the terrible suspicion that the greatest heresy is not doubting the Emperor, but never questioning him at all. If you who read this are faithful, I do not seek to shake your devotion. If you serve with certainty and find strength in your beliefs, then perhaps my corruption is mine alone. But if you have doubts, if you have questions that doctrine does not answer, if you have looked at the Imperium's machinery and wondered at its terrible cost, then know that you are not alone. Know that others have walked this path before you, into darkness or enlightenment, I cannot say which. The door opens. Inquisitor Vex stands silhouetted in the light, her bolt pistol raised. Are you prepared, Father Thane? I set down my quill. I am. Have you made peace with the Emperor? I smile, sad and broken. In my own way, yes. She nods once, respect mingled with sorrow in her augmented gaze. Then may he judge you with mercy, whatever doubts consumed your faith. The last thing I see is not the Emperor's icon on the altar before me, but the face of the Inquisitor who will end my life. There is no malice there, no hatred. Only duty. Only certainty. Perhaps she is right. Perhaps I was corrupted, deceived, led astray by entities that feed on doubt as surely as the Emperor feeds on faith. Or perhaps I simply saw too clearly. The bolt pistol fires. In the moment before oblivion, I hear the entity's voice one final time, so faint it might be imagination. Truth or lies, Father Thane? In the end, does it matter? You asked questions. That alone was enough. Then darkness, absolute and eternal. These are the last words of Father Mordecai Thane, missionary of the ecclesiarchy, heretic or martyr. Let those who find them decide which. The Emperor protects. Or does he?